Every NFL team would relish the chance to be on any best of list, but not this one. For every season that ends in triumph, so many more end in disappointment, and from some of that disappointment comes devastation, which is the territory we're entering today. We will be counting down the 10 best NFL teams in the Super Bowl era that failed to even make it to the Super Bowl. Thank you so much for clicking on this video. The support and kind words this channel has been receiving has been phenomenal, and I could not be more thankful. If you haven't done so already, please consider subscribing to the channel and ringing that bell for future notifications. If you're on the fence, hopefully this video will do the trick. Much appreciated, and on with the video. As usual, we're going to be ranking these teams by their C-score, a metric developed by this channel to measure a team's overall quality. We've got a more thorough breakdown of this metric in the description of this video. A team's record is important, but it's not everything. So the 2011 Green Bay Packers, who went 15-1 but got bounced in their first playoff game, weren't a good enough team to make the top 10 with their C-score of just under 28. Here now is the top 10. We're starting off at number 10 in the AFL era, and the 12-2 Kansas City Chiefs. 2 years after winning the AFL title and playing in the first Super Bowl, and 1 year before winning the final AFL title and winning the Super Bowl, was this excellent team that went 12-2 and finished in a tie for first place in the Western Division. With 11 AFL All-Stars, including all 3 starting linebackers, the Chiefs were dominant, allowing just over 12 points per game in the high-scoring AFL. The problem goes back to that tie atop the division and the team they tied with, the defending AFL champion Oakland Raiders. This necessitated a tiebreaker game between the two teams to advance to the AFL title game, and that game was played in Oakland. For the Chiefs, they picked the worst moment to have their worst game, getting shellacked 41-6, giving up more than 3 times more points than they allowed in the regular season. Raiders receiver Fred Biletnikoff particularly ate them up with 180 yards receiving and 3 touchdowns. That Oakland Raider team were no slouches though, and they take the 9th spot in these rankings. After their own 12-2 season and subsequent victory in the tiebreaker playoff game, they had to travel across the country to play the New York Jets for the right to advance to Super Bowl III. The Jets won the much weaker Eastern Division, in which no other team was better than 500, and they had the prior week off. Yet they still trailed in the fourth quarter before pulling out a 27-23 victory. The Raiders weren't hurting for AFL All-Stars themselves, sending 9 players to that game. They scored more than 32 points per game, and they were by just about every measure the AFL's best team in 1968. The one thing they had going against them was circumstance and bad luck, having to play that unscheduled playoff game before having to go on the road in the AFL title game. Had that not been the case, it could have been the Raiders who pulled the upset in Super Bowl III and etching their place in NFL history. Coming in at number 8 are the Los Angeles Rams of 1973, a season which saw the beginning of a 7-year-long streak of NFC West Division titles, all to be followed by playoff heartbreak. At 12-2, this was the best of those Rams teams, their 1979 NFC Championship team included. With a highly productive offense and a smothering defense, they tied the Minnesota Vikings for the best record in the NFC and were looking like the favorites to make it to the Super Bowl. But with the NFL's rotating playoff schedule, they were forced on the road in the divisional round against the Dallas Cowboys. Although not quite as talented, the Cowboys had a massive edge in recent playoff experience and success, and they carried those edges to a 17-0 first half lead. The Rams clawed back into the game, getting as close as 17-16, before Cowboys wide receiver Drew Pearson put the game away with a spectacular 83-yard touchdown. As mentioned earlier, the Rams were never quite able to get their groove going during the 70s, despite fielding some excellent teams, but none as good as this one. Showing just how much of a fluke the Jets' win in Super Bowl III was, we once again head back to the 1968 season. Yet another 12-2 team, this time the Dallas Cowboys, fell short in their efforts to make the Super Bowl. In a season where the average NFL team scored 20.5 points per game, Dallas was scoring at a clip of 30.8 points, more than a 50% increase. The best team in the league that season were the 13-1 Baltimore Colts, but the Cowboys didn't even get the chance to face them in the playoffs. Yet another victim of the asinine rotating playoff schedule, the Cowboys were forced to travel to Cleveland to play the 10-4 Browns. Cleveland forced 4 turnovers, while tailback Leroy Kelly ran up 133 total yards and scored 2 touchdowns in a 31-20 victory. The Browns even got to host those Colts the following week, but they lost 34-0. For the record, the NFL finally stopped doing this in 1975 and instituted playoff seeding based on record. This season further brandished the Cowboys' bridesmaid reputation until they finally made the Super Bowl in 1970, then finally won it all in 1971. Our number 6 entry is a lot more modern than our previous entries. In fact, they're as modern as you can get. It's the 2023 Baltimore Ravens. Yes, the Ravens really were that good this past season. Their 13-4 record doesn't immediately jump out as an all-time great, but the teams they beat to achieve it do, with 10 of those victories coming against teams with a winning record, many in dominant fashion. They had the league's MVP, the best scoring defense in the league, and they outscored their opponents by over 200 points. But, as has been the case for the Ravens in this era, they came up short in the playoffs. They made it further than they had in the previous decade, advancing to the AFC Championship game, only to lose 17-10 to the Kansas City Chiefs, a team that solidified its dynasty 2 weeks later in the Super Bowl. Their dominant rushing attack was limited to 16 carries the entire game, while they lost the turnover battle 3-0. At this point, the Ravens have to be hung with the underachiever moniker, and until such time that they can at least make it to a Super Bowl, that label is gonna stick. 3 years after losing their undefeated record in Super Bowl 42, our number 5 entry, the New England Patriots of 2010, were back in their superpower form, breezing to a 14-2 record. Now, during the majority of New England's run, their gaudy records were built on the back of incredibly weak schedules. That was not the case this season, as they played a top 5 schedule and were the only team in that top 5 to post a winning record. They earned the number 1 seed and a first-round bye in the playoffs, and only had their division rival New York Jets standing between them and a trip to the AFC title game. The same Jets they walloped 45-3 just 6 weeks earlier. The Patriots entered the second quarter with a 3-0 lead. After LaDainian Tomlinson punched it in from 7 yards out for the Jets, the Patriots never regained that lead, losing 28-21 in a massive upset. The main difference in this game, the Jets recorded 5 sacks while the Patriots recorded none. New England did make it back to the Super Bowl the following season, but they also lost that game to a New Jersey team pretending to be from New York. Remember when I said the Ravens had become underachievers? Well, it all started here, our number 4 entry, the 2019 Baltimore Ravens. Like their 2023 brethren, they played an above-average schedule, not maybe quite as difficult, but they rolled out to a 14-2 record. They were only 3rd in defensive scoring, but they again had the league's MVP and the number 1 scoring offense in the league. In total, they outscored their opponents by a mind-boggling 249 points. That means on average, they outscored their opponents by more than 15.5 points per game. In just their wins, they outscored their opponents by more than 19 points per game. They brought a 12-game winning streak into the playoffs, where they promptly lost in the first round at home to the bottom-seeded Tennessee Titans. In fact, they were stomped 28-12, a game that was covered in my video of largest playoff upsets that can be accessed by clicking the card in the upper right corner of your screen. The Ravens' dominance this season foretold at least an appearance in the Super Bowl. Alas, it was here that the underachievers were born. We travel back in time now for our number 3 entry to the first post-merger season in the NFL, 1970. It was the Minnesota Vikings who racked up the NFL's best record at 12-2. Their offense was excellent, finishing 3rd in the NFL in scoring, but their defense was lights out, allowing only 143 points all season, just over 10 per game. The Rams and the Lions, tied for 2nd in defensive scoring, were as close to 10th place as they were to 1st. This was the 2nd straight season the Vikings led the league in defensive yardage allowed and in points allowed. The previous season, the Vikings made it to the Super Bowl. This season, clearly they did not. And in an era of the rotating playoff schedule, the Vikings actually got to play at home against the upstart San Francisco 49ers, winners of their first division title in their 25th season of existence. The Vikings' offense sputtered in this one, scoring their only touchdown while down 10 in the 4th quarter, coming up on the short end of a 17-14 score. This was par for the course for the 1970s Vikings. They did make it to 3 more Super Bowls during the decade, but never won a single one, getting shut out in the first half of every game. They still await that first brass ring. We're now at our number 2 team, and this entry is gonna hurt for Pittsburgh Steelers fans, because we're here to talk about the 1976 team. After back-to-back championships in 1974 and 75, this team, looking for an unprecedented and as of yet still unrealized 3rd straight Super Bowl title, was much better than the 1974 outfit and only ever so slightly inferior to the 1975 crew. The Steel Curtain was at its steeliest, allowing fewer than 10 points per game while still ranking 5th in the NFL in scoring. Perhaps as a result of those 2 Super Bowl runs, they only started the season 1-4, with 3 losses by 3 or fewer points. Even after a dominant 9-0 run to end the season, including a ridiculous 5 shutouts, the Steelers were doomed to the 3 seed in the AFC and life on the road in the playoffs. They smashed the Colts 40-14 in the divisional round, before eventually running out of gas in a 24-7 AFC title game loss to their bitter rivals, the Oakland Raiders, a dominant team in their own right, going 13-1 and winning the Super Bowl themselves. The Steelers didn't get the three-peat in 1976, but in 1978 and 79, they got the repeat. Still to this day, the only NFL franchise to win back-to-back Super Bowls twice. For those of a certain age, the number 1 team on this list should be no surprise: the 15-1 Minnesota Vikings of the 1998 season. Not really remembered for a great defense, they finished a highly respectable 6th in the NFL in points allowed. But yeah, this team is remembered for its offense. They didn't just lead the league in scoring, they set a then NFL record with 556 points, nearly 35 points per game. Led by rookie phenom Randy Moss, a resurgent Randall Cunningham, and an excellent offensive line, this was a juggernaut that no team had much hope of stopping. The Arizona Cardinals sure couldn't, allowing 41 points to them in the divisional round. And while the Falcons did better in the NFC title game, they still allowed 27 points. Oh, but it probably should have been 30. Kicker Gary Anderson for the Vikings was perfect on the season. Literally perfect. 59 for 59 on extra points, 35 for 35 on field goals. Including the playoffs and extending back as far as the 96 season, he had made 46 consecutive field goals and 165 consecutive extra points for good measure. He had made 122 consecutive kicks of any kind. But with 2:11 left on the clock in the 4th quarter and Minnesota leading by 7, he missed a relatively easy kick from 39 yards out. Now, Gary Anderson did not lose this game for the Vikings, but he surely could have put it away. Minnesota passed the ball on the prior third down, allowing Atlanta to keep its lone timeout. The defense allowed Atlanta to march down the field and tie the game. Then the Vikings got the ball first in overtime and had 2 chances in overtime to score and failed to do so. Brutal all around for this team, ranked as the greatest team in the entire Super Bowl era, who failed to make it to the Super Bowl. Looking at the top 10 at a glance here, we can see that only 2 teams between 1974 and 2009 appear on this list. It just so happens to be the 2 teams at the very top. 5 of the 6 teams from the 60s and 70s can at least say they lost their playoff games on the road, 3 of them doing so with a better record than the team that they lost to, while all the other teams from the 90s and beyond took their loss at home. A lot of these teams recovered from these seasons. The Chiefs won the Super Bowl the very next season, while the Steelers took another season away before winning their back-to-back Super Bowls for the second time. Some, like the Vikings and the Ravens, together making up 2/3 of the top 6, still wear their scars. Hey, you're still here. Very awesome of you, thank you. Hopefully by getting this far you enjoyed what you watched. So if you wouldn't mind giving the video a like, sharing it with some friends, that would be greatly appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please consider subscribing to the channel. With our previous 2 NFL videos, the greatest upsets in playoff history and the biggest one-year wonders, we now have enough for a proper playlist, which we will be giving the extremely creative name of NFL Rankings Videos. Lots of market research went into that name, trust me. We will be looking to add to this list very soon. I've gotten some excellent suggestions for future videos in the comments, and if you happen to have any more, I would definitely love to hear them. Thank you so much for taking the time to spend with us, take good care, and I hope you have an awesome day.